Hey everyone, stay tuned for this video wrap-up of the Arkansas Shrimp Tank, where you're going to learn how to go from a shrimp to a shark in the business world.
Hey everybody, welcome to the post-show wrap-up of the Arkansas Shrimp Tank. I'm your host Rich Jensen along with my co-host David Sims. Each week on the post-show wrap-up, we like to bring you the highlights of our conversations with some of the brightest and best CEOs, entrepreneurs, and actually startup helpers like Glenn has been to people in and around the state of Arkansas, particularly those entrepreneurs that are really just getting started. And so we just really had a fun time with Glenn. He is the co-founder and CEO of Glen Creek Media. And we also had
Dave Creek Media.
I did it
Glen
again.
Crockett. Glen Crockett of Dave Creek Media. Yeah. And just remember, Dave is a bear.
Not to be confused with Davy Crockett.
That's right. That's right. It's actually, you have to listen to the podcast. It's actually a bear that they captured on a creek. So
Yeah. With a smile, I grinned it. Yeah,
you grinned it down.
That's right.
We also had some big news. If you haven't listened to the podcast, we are now part of iHeartRadio. iHeartRadio does about 147 million podcast downloads a month. So we think now that we're on it, it'll probably be 150 million downloads a month. Especially with Glenn being our first guest.
This has been a really wonderful podcast. You got to listen to it. To have a descendant of Davy Crockett on the show has been amazing.
And I have it's actually documented that I am. So somewhere down the line.
That's right. That's great. Well, one of the it was a great podcast. And you really need to listen to it. I encourage our viewers to listen to the whole podcast. But one of the things, I think Rich asked you this question, the essentials in getting started for media and marketing. You shared some very interesting and good things. Share with our viewers what that was about, what's essential for that.
Sure. One of the first things that you want to do is make sure that you identify your value proposition, right? So why would somebody buy your product or service instead of somebody else's? And if you don't have a clear value prop or value proposition defined why they would do that, then it's going to be really hard to get people to make purchases. The second piece is really around who you should target with your marketing. You see billboards and television and some of these, and it's really hard. I wouldn't consider that target marketing because it's anybody that happens to drive by. But if you're going to do laser-focused targeted marketing via email, social, whatever that is, then you need to understand who your ideal customer profile is. And we refer to that as the ICP. So who is it you're trying to target? And something we didn't talk about, but you could have multiple ICPs depending on what product or service you're selling. So you could have an ICP of a millennial client or prospect, and then one from maybe a boomer. So you could have multiple ICPs, but the key is that you need to have that so that you can send the right message to the right person.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, and we didn't talk about it in the podcast, so if you're watching the video, this is the first time he's talking about it, but offline we talked about analysis paralysis and people just not quite getting started when they really need to get started. Share a little bit with our listeners about that.
Yeah, that's right. You hear a lot of people that are, they build this 200-page business plan, right? And they're doing research and they're doing all these things, but they struggle because they're afraid to go out and make a phone call or try to sell something. Even on Shark Tank, if you've watched those, oftentimes they ask them, why haven't you just called them? Why didn't you go there? And the companies that do really well, they're not afraid to go because most likely nobody's going to die from something you say to someone on a sales call, right? It's not that big a deal. You're not transporting a kidney. You're trying to convey a message and get a client, right? But that's, you've got to get out there and we have a saying.
But here's the thing: is no one rejects you while you're writing a business plan.
That's right.
But so if you try and get a customer or a client, you might get rejected, and people just have a hard time with that.
That's exactly right, and you've got to get used to that. And so we say nothing happens until somebody sells something. Mm-hmm. So if there is no revenue coming in, you don't pay the bills, you can't hire people, you can't create jobs, you can't do those things. So somebody has to sell something. So that's a key piece.
Final question that we had for this video wrap-up. You shared on the podcast about the biggest mistakes you've seen in marketing, companies that do. Share with our viewers what that is.
Yeah, the biggest mistake that we see is really around every marketing message trying to sell something. So people don't want to be sold to, right? Especially the younger, they want a relationship first. So at our company, we follow 3 R's, and we do this all the time. And it's whether it's social, email, whatever it is, even face-to-face, is that we try to do, the first one is relational. You need to be relational. You need to offer them something that is not trying to sell them. Maybe it's tips or best practices, things like that, something relational. And then the second R is relevancy, right? It needs to be relevant to the audience, to the ICP, the ideal customer profile.
Right.
So if you're selling to someone who is a little older, maybe your images and your videos need to be relevant. They're on channels, media that they would consume. And then the last piece has to be responsive. At some point, you do have to ask them to do something.
Right.
But you want to reduce as much sales friction as you can. So maybe it's just sign up to get our newsletter, or click or recommend or whatever. Or it could be click here to make a purchase.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's good.
Yeah, you got to have some kind of call to action.
That's right.
Ultimately,
That's
right?
exactly right.
So,
A lot of good nuggets on that podcast.
well, Glenn, not Davey, Glenn.
And I go by Dave, so it's fine. Yeah, but
We want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. For those who maybe haven't listened to the entire podcast and they want to get a hold of you, want to find out more about Dave Creek Media, share with our viewers how they can do that.
sure, you can email me at Glenn, Glenn, 2 N's, the second N is silent, at davecreekmedia.com. Glenn at Dave Creek Media, and I'll get right back to you.
Excellent, excellent. Remember, you can catch the entire podcast at arkansas.shrimptankpodcast.com. You can subscribe through iTunes, and now you can subscribe and download through iHeartRadio. So until next week, stay safe, have a great week, and remember, in the business world, to become a shark, we all start out as shrimp.